Hello, all you Philippians people. Today's lesson, Philippians 3, 1 through 11. I want to know Christ. What a good lesson. Verse 1 begins with an exhortation to rejoice in the Lord as he's in prison. We're not in prison and we still don't rejoice. We're grumbling, complaining. It's amazing words. Rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice. I love that Christmas song. And he makes no apologies for giving the same instructions that he has given to them before, over and over and over. Have you ever said to yourself, I've heard this about the teacher and the preacher, and I know what this passage says, yet we're going to say it again and again and again. And I have no problem sharing with you this again, says the preacher, but it's a safe thing for you, and you read this verse again, and you listen to it. But sometimes you read it, and you read it like you've read it for the first time. Peter repeats this idea. 1 Peter 1, 13 through 15. Sometimes we're not ready to hear things. And Paul wants us to recall his instructions as there is safety. Don't skip over the passages that are boring. Not that we ever would. Doesn't mention this as they are out of sermon material. But repetition is key to understanding the word. And it saves our lives. Verses 2 and 3. These are some harsh words for Judaizer, the dogs. Now, these were people which were certain Jews, legalists in Paul's day. They would wait until Paul had left a church, and then they would go in and preach that Jesus was not enough. We do that today. There's churches everywhere that does that, only not quite that brazen. And the law still had to be followed. You still had to be circumcised according to the law. Paul considered them perversions of the gospel. Look at Matthew 5:17. Verse 3 this verse is critical to this passage. Underline it, for crying out loud. Jewish legalists considered themselves right with God as they had been circumcised, and therefore glorifying for what they had done in their flesh. Paul declared that they who had put their faith in Jesus was the true circumcised. Think about that. Let's read that again. Paul declared those who had put their faith in Christ, Jesus, the true circumcised. Special cutting away of the old man. Legalists got mad when he said this. Well, now verses 4 through 6. So and he lists the things that Jews would appreciate. He says, I more. So he's going to list the things. I more. It's kind of like when Paul's going to list the things that make him an educated Jew. And then he goes on in verse 7 to finish this thought. But it's kind of like, have you ever heard when you were a child, my dad can beat up your dad? Well, he lists them. He says, I was circumcised the 8th day, and I'm of the Benjamin tribe. So I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. Now, there in that day, not all Hebrews focused on being an Hebrew. There was like some Grecian Hebrews going around, and those Hebrews had adopted the Grecian lifestyle, a way of thinking. They were Jews by birth, but had a very non-Jewish approach to living. And Paul did not want to be associated with that sort of Jew. He was also asked to the law, being a Pharisee, which was the highest sect of those who proclaimed to keep the law. No one did it as well as them. And we keep the law. And he had zeal for persecuting Christians who didn't want to keep, or Jews that didn't want to keep the law. And in the law, he was blameless. Jews who have thought that they were blameless before God. But he continues this thought in verse 7 through 8. Count all of those Jewish gains as loss for the sake of Christ. And do you have I don't know if you have that app that has all 6 versions right next to each other, but I like verse 7 in the NLT version the best. Look at that. It's quite a change from being religious and following rules. The only thing a Jew could talk about is how they keep all the rules. Are we like that? Do you know of any religions like that? I keep all the rules. Well, religion does not get us to God. We work at putting God in a good mood so he doesn't smack us. Think about that. Do all the rules are just like dung, according to these verses. Dung. Poo, people, poo. Paul is saying he puts no confidence in the flesh and works. Paul is talking about a personal relationship with God, an intimate relationship, talking with God, spending time in his word, spending time with his people in fellowship. You can't get that watching church on TV at home. Sorry, you can't. Go to church. Have some fellowship. But you have to have your intimate time with him at home. Rules are a barrier to a relationship with God. Now, verses 9 through 11, and we'll finish up this lesson. Verse 10, another reason Paul gets rid of the flesh, that he may know him and identify with Christ and his power and his resurrection, and to share in his sufferings. The Greek word here for know is not intellectual knowledge to experimental knowledge. He wanted to taste and know the Lord in his heart. I like that verse where it says, taste and see the Lord, for he is good. Verse 11, by any means, cause some different opinions. Paul was not trying to participate in the resurrection of the dead. The Greek word for attain means to arrive. Paul is saying he wants to know Jesus so thoroughly, by whatever means, even martyr's death. He didn't say in a blessing in plenty. Paul is saying, I surrender all. See you guys next week.